Al Jazeera Podcasts.
Today, has your university stopped investing in Israel? It's become a nationwide movement for U.S. universities to divest, but it's a long, hard process.
In this moment, Earlham has still failed to divest from Israel.
What we're all hearing about divesting versus what is actually happening. I'm Malika Bilal, and this is The Take. Today, I'm joined by one of our senior producers here at The Take, Amy Walters. Hey, Amy.
Hey, Malika.
It's good to have you back on. So you have been doing some fact-finding on a university divestment story, but this story you have a personal connection to.
Yeah, it's actually the school that I went to, Earlham College. It's a small school. Many people probably don't even know it. When I was there, it was just over 1,000 students, and now after COVID, it shrunk to just over 600. And it's in a pretty unremarkable town, Richmond, Indiana. So knowing that, you might not think divesting in Israel would come up, but it did, the day before graduation.
Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to
Nolia Wilcox, one of Earlham's graduating seniors, was leading the closing speech at one of the ceremonies.
We had to submit our script to the registrar and get it approved and all of that. And it was very, poetic, yay, you're graduating.
The world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over, announcing your place in the family of things.
And then I woke up the morning before we were supposed to deliver it, and I was just like, why are we not talking about Palestine? And I kind of had a feeling that no one else who was speaking that day would.
So without approval or consultation with the administration, Nolia did.
Now we have one last thing to share with you today. As we sit here, the wild geese do fly. But meanwhile, other things happen as well. The Israeli state is also continuing its genocide of the Palestinian people in this moment. And in this moment, Earlham has still failed to divest from Israel. May we all be committed to justice and liberation for all people as we live beyond our Earlham lives. Free Palestine.
That was Nolia's friend delivering the speech with her.
So what did people do when they heard this? Was this a surprise?
The fact that divestment came up wasn't actually a surprise. Well, not to me. Because another thing you should know about Earlham is that it's Quaker. And to put it simply, Quakers believe in peace.
Testimonies that are well known today are testimonies of simplicity and peace and integrity, community.
The Quaker peace testimony was written way back in 1660 as a form of nonviolent protest against the King of England. And it begins, quote, "We utterly deny all outward wars and strife and fightings with outward weapons for any end under any pretense whatsoever."
As followers of Christ, we believe that we have been disarmed by the gospel. We are no longer going to lift up weaponry against our fellow man.
And this tradition of nonviolence extends from these nonviolent protests in the 1600s to refusing to pay taxes because the money funds the military here in the U.S. today.
And I think, given our long history as peaceniks, Quakers should definitely have an exception for where their money goes.
And when I was applying to colleges, these are the values that attracted me to the school. And they attract a lot of progressively minded students, like Nolia. She even majored in peace and global studies. And on the website, they say that students have been involved in the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement in support of Palestinian nonviolent resistance to the occupation. But before I talked to Nolia and even heard about her speech, there were these protests going on at universities around the country, and I started thinking about Earlham. Did Earlham divest? And I realized other alums were thinking the same thing when I started to see posts on social media. And there was one from someone in the class of 1999 saying Earlham essentially had divested from weapons of war. Other people were sharing it, and it was easy to believe. But Nolia says that wasn't the case.
And so I said, Earlham hasn't divested from Israel. But in the recording, you can see the president shaking her head.
I watched the video, and Ann Houtman, the president then, does shake her head after the speech. It's hard to tell what she's saying, but overall, Nolia was feeling pretty discouraged with the administration.
They had committed to a meeting with us, but then the whole semester was emails deflecting, and then it keeps getting pushed back, and then it's, we'll meet after spring break, and then it's actually, I'm really busy this week. The whole semester, Students for Justice in Palestine was just sending emails. And so that's really one of the reasons why I feel really pessimistic about a lot of the progress that's happening right now at universities in the US.
So it all just seemed pretty unclear and ambiguous. And answers were hard to come by. Have they divested? Haven't they? If they haven't, why not? So I decided to see if I could find out. I reached out to Earlham's administration asking for an interview. They said it was a busy time. They were changing president and the provost right now, and they didn't have anyone to speak. So I sent an email back with specific questions. I didn't get an answer to that either. But since my request, the outgoing president, Ann Houtman, did reach out to alumni in a Zoom call, saying they're still working on it.
We're continuing our dialogue with students while simultaneously asking our investment consultants for greater transparency about the commingled funds in our portfolio. That will be an ongoing conversation, and we'll have more information to share later.
So I reached out to some alumni who I thought might know a little bit about Earlham's history on this.
Earlham has a very special connection to Palestine, I think, unlike any other.
That's Steve Tamari. He graduated from Earlham back in 1981, and he's donated money to the school since. He's closing in on retirement now after spending the better part of his life teaching the history of the Middle East at Southern Illinois University in Edwardsville. Like Earlham, Steve's Quaker, and like many Earlham students and Earlham graduates, he's Palestinian American.
My father's family left in April of 1948. My father was sponsored by Quakers from Palestine. My father and my mother became Quakers.
But growing up, Steve didn't know many Palestinians from Palestine until he went to Earlham.
There was one Palestinian student when I was there, and I think he was the first Palestinian I ever really met, at least in the States.
So Steve says it's both of those things, being Quaker and this welcoming of Palestinians, that makes Earlham pretty unique.
I think what makes Earlham special is that it has these values, at least it has the pretense of commitment to these values of, equality, democracy, right? That of God in every person, if you want to use the Quaker language.
And it also has a connection to another Quaker school in the occupied West Bank, Ramallah Friends. It's a pre-kindergarten to 12th grade, and over the years, it's been sending graduates on to Earlham.
People used to say, well, students from the Friends School would apply to 2 or 3 places, Harvard, Yale, and Earlham.
And it's not just Ramallah Friends. Earlham has students from Gaza, too. There's a student this year who's had a really hard time.
Who's lost several family members since, October 7.
And Earlham's also where Steve first learned a lot of Palestinian history.
My father never talked a lot about Palestine, actually, at least as I was growing up.
Earlham kind of altered his life course.
Yeah, Earlham was very much a part of my awakening as, as a Palestinian, especially politically. Yeah, that was my introduction, really.
And if you've been paying attention to the protests and encampments around the country, Steve's name might ring a bell.
Dr. Steve Tamari, a 65-year-old history professor at SIUE, was arrested and sent to the hospital after a protest at WashU last week.
This was at Washington University in St. Louis, another school across the river from where he teaches in Illinois. There was an encampment there, and a lot of his students had gone to protest. So Steve was filming what was happening, trying to protect his students while they were trying to protect Palestinians.
The whole thing happened so quickly. I didn't know it just happened. And then I was on the ground and I was arrested.
Steve was held in jail for several hours. A few days later, he went to get checked out by a doctor. Many of his ribs were broken.
5 on one side and 4 on the other side. And then this finger is broken. Yeah. I haven't talked to any other. I've avoided all press, by the way. You're the first person I've talked to. I've been a little skeptical about academia for a while, and I'm really glad to be almost done with it. But this situation has really put the light on the class difference, I don't know what you call it, between administrators, many of whom are former faculty, but they're just a different beast when they're on that side of the line, And yeah, it's very depressing to see this way of thinking operated, just like Earl, in this context of the war on Gaza.
As for his alma mater, Steve knows Earlham is a small school. He knows it's hard to keep it funded. He knew it was where he wanted to send his daughter, Amal. But he also knows he wants Earlham to divest.
I want to see Earlham survive. I mean, I'm so glad Emma was able to go there. But it seems like they can't cash in, their values, right?
What Earlham has done after the break. So, Amy, as you're telling this story about Earlham and its connection to Palestine, I'm wondering what it's been like for Palestinians on campus right now. What have you heard from people?
Unfortunately, not much. Palestinians there are worried. I reached out to some of the Palestinian students, but many were concerned about repercussions and didn't want to talk. I did get a hold of one Palestinian American, though, Steve's daughter, who he mentioned, Amal Tamari. She graduated just 2 years ago. And her experience, even decades later, was a lot like her dad's.
When I was there, I really enjoyed it. I was actually the only Palestinian American at the school, but there were a lot of Palestinians from Palestine.
By the time Amal graduated, she'd spent time co-convening Earlham's chapter of Students for Justice in Palestine, or SJP.
It was actually like the coolest club on campus, kind of. We would do Palestinian heritage night, and we'd order a bunch of food and have poetry and singing and debka.
But they were also focused on showing what occupation is like. At many schools, the grassy area in the center of campus is known as the Quad. At Earlham, it's called the Heart.
We would always build a wall on the Heart every year. It was pretty elaborate, actually. It was big wooden panels, and we'd draw all over them. Do even mock checkpoints. It was always quite an obtrusive object, and you had to pass it every day.
And then in 2021, things in Palestine started to heat up. That was Amal's junior year. So they did a walkout and a march to the office of Earlham's then president, Ann Houtman.
We handed her our demands that were divestment, and she never responded to those demands.
Again, Earlham didn't respond to our request for an interview, but from what Amal and other alums have told me, there was this dialogue that for more than a decade has been resurfacing at Earlham every few years. It's about Earlham divesting its endowment and other investments from Israel.
What Earlham always said to me and to people I was organizing with at the time is that they can't divest because they don't know who they're invested in. And so they didn't ever claim to be divested. They just said that their money was in a lot of mutual funds that were private and that they didn't have a say in who they were invested in. And they really would shut us down anytime we brought it up.
What she was saying was a lot like what Nolia told me. But of course, Amal was only there for 4 years. This is a video from Earlham's BDS group from before that in 2011.
We are students at Earlham College, and we support BDS Earlham.
I'm a Palestinian citizen from Gaza City.
I'm Palestinian living in Jerusalem.
And the biggest success for the students was getting the coffee shop to stop selling Sabra hummus in 2012. Sabra's parent company, the Strauss Group, provided support to the Golani Brigade, one of Israel's oldest and most decorated military units. Then, in 2015, the Earlham Student Senate voted to divest completely. And the Student Senate's divestment resolution called for divestment from Motorola, Hewlett-Packard, Caterpillar, all companies involved in the Israeli military or security operations in the occupied West Bank. But that was the students, not the administration. And one source told me it was one person holding back. For consensus, another Quaker tradition, everyone has to agree. So one vote is basically equal to 1,000. It didn't happen. And it's also probably worth noting, as a Quaker school, Earlham also had a socially responsible investment policy that alumni I've spoken to say was around for years. And on that Zoom call, President Houtman talks about this policy.
Our policy on socially responsible endowment investments, which Earlham has had since, I believe, 2007. The board first adopted it in 2007, and it says that Earlham would be guided by the testimonies of the Society of Friends when making investments. And what are those testimonies? The peace testimony.
Then the Zoom gets kind of warbly and she comes back and talks about looking into the investments. I've seen the policy and it's pretty specific. It says, quote, because Quakers believe that war making is contrary to the desired order for which Friends have historically worked and witnessed, certain war-related companies are defined as outside the range of those companies in which Earlham desires to invest and derive profit. A little farther down the document, there are statements that walk that back a bit. But when I spoke to Nolia, who just graduated, she told me Earlham's socially responsible advisory committee wasn't part of the recent talks between the administration and the Students for Justice in Palestine. Another alum told me they disbanded in 2018. And again, Earlham didn't respond to my questions, but there's no evidence of this committee on their website today.
So it sounds like no divestment and no real history of divestment on the administration's part.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, when I got back on social media, that post I saw about divestment had been updated, acknowledging things weren't as simple as the guy who posted it originally thought. But just to be sure, I reached out to another Quaker institution to find out what they knew.
I was actually working on creating tools for divestment for the last 17 years. So this is my expertise.
That's Dov Baum. She's Israeli.
In the early 2000s, I started organizing a mass protests against the occupation.
And now she leads the Action Center for Corporate Accountability for the American Friends Service Committee. And what they do is help schools like Earlham divest and maintain this list of companies that they say knowingly enable or facilitate prolonged military occupations, apartheid, and genocide. You could see the list of companies on their website. It's at afsc.org/divest. There's Boeing, General Dynamics, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, these big defense companies, Caterpillar, Chevron, Motorola, Palantir, Valero. There's energy companies, and then Israeli companies, Israeli banks, and this company, Partner Communications, which is traded on the NASDAQ stock exchange. That's just a few of the companies there. There's a lot. So schools, or those who manage money for the schools, can look at the list and look at their endowment and other investments and maybe move things around.
For me, to say this school has divested will mean they have made a commitment to divest. And any policy should come also with a commitment to public disclosure, to follow up with all these institutions and to check that they are actually divesting and actually to help them divest.
They also have a list of universities where the students have chosen to divest.
And in fact, there are students across the US that have passed divestment resolutions of the student body asking their universities to divest well before this current wave of student organizing.
The holdup is the administrations.
The one university we thought has done anything about it was Earlham College. But I think quickly afterwards, we discovered that they haven't. So Earlham has not divested.
I asked Dov if they had any authority or influence over Earlham's investments as a Quaker institution, but she said no.
I think moral authority, nothing else. There are other Quaker schools as well, and I really hope to see Quaker schools actually take the lead.
Steve and Amal, they're still pretty frustrated with Earlham. So when they got an email from Earlham's Alumni for Palestine asking them for support,
I just signed it automatically and I shared it with all my Earlham friends.
There's 4 demands in total. So divestment, they're asking for Earlham to call on senators and congressional representatives to demand a ceasefire, and they're asking to formally apologize to Palestinian students and alumni for staying silent, not offering necessary support to students who are affected by the situation in Gaza.
In November, President Heltman did send out a note encouraging members of the Earlham community to reach out to elected officials to call for a ceasefire. And she seemed to try to address the Palestinian students in that recent Zoom.
We have a significant Palestinian population at Earlham, including several students from Gaza. Right now, we're very focused this year on making sure those students felt safe and cared for on campus.
She also emphasized Earlham's strong relationship still with Ramallah friends. But there are changes ahead for Earlham. They'll have a new president next year, and Heltman is retiring. Amal still thinks fondly of Earlham, and many of her best friends are still from there.
It was a good time I couldn't have imagined being in other places.
But that doesn't keep her from seeing things as they are.
I think it's really sweet that alumni are so think that Earlham's going to be perfect. But unfortunately, they're really not showing up right now. I would love to see Earlham lead the way for divestment. I definitely think it's possible. And once it happens at a few schools, it's going to be a domino effect. I really do believe that. And I think, for Earlham to keep its principles and practices, it could really set the standard in a pretty beautiful way.
And that's The Take. This episode was produced by Amy Walters with Manahil Naveed, Marcos Bartolomé, Noor Wazwaz, and me, Malika Bilal. It was edited by Alexandra Locke. The Take production team is Amy Walters, Ashish Malhotra, Catherine Newhan, Chloe K. Lee, David Enders, Duha Mossad, Khalid Sultan, Manahil Naveed, Marcos Bartolomé, Noor Wazwaz, Cyril Khalili, Sonia Bagad, Tabish Talib, Tamara Kandakar, and Zainab Badr. I'm your host, Malika Bilal. Our sound designer is Alex Roldan. Alexandra Locke is The Take's executive producer, and Ney Alvarez is Al Jazeera's head of audio. We'll be back tomorrow.